Mainstream media broadcasts a specific narrative. Inflation is cooling, stock markets are breaking records, and the economy has achieved a soft landing. But on the ground, an entirely different reality is playing out, invisible to algorithmic trading bots and detached policymakers. The definition of displacement has fundamentally changed. It is no longer a geographic relocation to a less desirable zip code. In the modern economic landscape, an eviction notice is a terminal event. It is a direct plunge off an economic cliff. To understand the shift, look at the traditional mental model, the housing ladder. Historically, families facing financial hardship would downsize from a 3-bedroom house to a 2-bedroom apartment. But institutional investors and algorithmic price-setting software have methodically removed the bottom rungs of this ladder. Because cheaper apartments no longer exist in the current ecosystem, families are being pushed entirely out of the housing market. The hard data strict of political spin reveals the scale of this failure. The point-in-time counts released by the Department of Housing and Urban Development show a catastrophic break in a historical trend. Over 1,000 Americans are now unhoused on any given night. This is a 34% increase over the last decade, marking the largest single-year jump in homelessness ever recorded in the United States. Researchers acknowledge this number is a significant undercount. The point-in-time survey only captures individuals visually identified in shelters or on the streets during a single night in January. It misses the hundreds of thousands of people living in cheap motels, commercial storage units, or the back of their cars. The housing system's baseline safety mechanisms have been structurally eradicated. This leaves working professionals, service workers, and retirees in a free fall with no institutional net to catch them. Mass displacement is no longer a strictly urban phenomenon confined to the dense downtown cores of cities like San Francisco or New York. The crisis has reached suburban districts nationwide where families earning median incomes are suddenly operating under extreme financial leverage. This pie chart represents a median suburban household budget. Traditionally, housing was a 30% cost burden. That burden has expanded to consume 60 or 70% of income, creating a zero-margin reality with no capital for transportation, healthcare, or food. In a landscape dependent on personal vehicles, one transmission repair or one missed shift due to a sick child mathematically triggers the automated eviction process. Unlike urban centers with emergency shelters, the suburbs are resource deserts. Families are forced to live in minivans parked in big box retail lots, hiding their reality from neighbors and law enforcement. The suburban collapse proves the housing crisis is no longer geographically isolated. Neighborhoods once considered financial safe havens are now vulnerable to the same displacement mechanics as urban cores. The profile of the unhoused population is changing. The data no longer points exclusively to the chronically unhoused. This wave consists of full-time warehouse workers, nursing assistants, and gig drivers. Citizens whose wages cannot keep pace with rent hikes imposed by out-of-state property management conglomerates. The most unsettling shift is found in federal tracking of families with children. Homelessness among this demographic has surged by 39%. Children now represent roughly 1 in 5 homeless Americans. This shift transfers the systemic burden of the housing collapse directly onto the public education system. Teachers are now tasked with managing students who do homework in motel rooms or sleep sitting upright in the back seats of sedans. Constant displacement fractures cognitive development and destroys academic continuity. Industrial-scale family evictions create a cycle of chronic stress. By allowing this level of instability to persist, the system ensures a future adult population shaped by the trauma of early displacement, altering the country's socio-economic trajectory. New York City serves as the primary indicator for the national real estate market. The pressures seen here reveal the potential future for every major American city. The New York City continuum of care has hit a milestone metric. A density of displacement reaching 165.3 homeless individuals for every 10,000 residents. This volume is breaking municipal infrastructure. Shelter systems are operating beyond capacity, forcing the city to convert commercial hotels into emergency tree-dish dumpsters for displaced citizens. Meanwhile, eviction courts are clearing pandemic-era backlogs, issuing legal warrants that physically removed thousands of people from their homes every week. The mathematical requirement for survival has outpaced local wages. A household income over $80,000 a year is now required just to qualify for a basic two-bedroom apartment. Service workers, municipal employees, and retail staff earn salaries that fall fatally short of this requirement. The city is systematically purging the very people who physically keep the infrastructure running. New York demonstrates the outcome of treating housing exclusively as a speculative financial asset. It creates an unsustainable paradox. Luxury real estate sitting atop a sprawling hidden encampment of former residents. In the modern digitized rental market, an eviction is a permanent financial scar, a digital record that effectively exiles a person from the market. The first step in this pipeline is the public court filing. The outcome of the case doesn't matter. The mere existence of the filing triggers the exile. Once it enters the public record, it is immediately scraped by data brokers. Corporate property management software uses this scraped data to evaluate future applications. Because algorithms flag any eviction history as a disqualifier, future housing applications are automatically rejected by nearly every property management system in the country. This forces displaced families into the shadowy, unregulated, subprime rental market where predatory landlords exploit tenants who have no legal leverage. A one-time financial setback is transformed into a permanent state of homelessness. The modern housing system utilizes a feedback loop that transforms a temporary financial setback into a state of exclusion. The logic of the algorithmic market ensures that once a tenant is displaced, they remain locked out. This trajectory is not unfixable. The nation has the financial capital and the empirical data to reverse the collapse. It requires a paradigm shift. Policymakers must treat evictions as a public health emergency rather than a private contract dispute. The first immediate intervention is the implementation of a universal right to counsel in housing court. Data from pilot cities shows that when tenants have legal representation, eviction rates drop significantly. Representation slows the assembly line court process and keeps families in their homes. Second, municipalities must decouple essential shelter from speculative corporate investment. When Wall Street hedge funds extract the maximum yield from working-class housing, mass displacement is the mathematical result. Expansion of permanent supportive housing and strict rent stabilization protections are the necessary structural counterweights. Taxpayers are spending billions of dollars to manage the fallout of systemic homelessness, emergency room visits, and the criminalization of poverty. Preventing an eviction requires a fraction of the capital. The financial data strongly favors preventative structural changes over institutionalized homelessness. The blueprints to fix the market's plumbing already exist. We are simply failing to use them. The continuation of this crisis is a matter of political will. Society must choose between immediate intervention or the continued systemic removal of the middle class from the housing market. By 2026, finding a family's entire life boxed up on a suburban curb is the standard output of a redesigned housing market. This displacement results from the intentional collision of two distinct forces, algorithmic price fixing and the Supreme Court mandate permitting the criminalization of poverty. This schematic maps exactly how that collision operates. It forms a continuous closed-loop pipeline that moves individuals from corporate-owned housing onto the streets and directly into the justice system. The mechanics of this loop demonstrate that the American working class is being actively caught in a mechanism engineered to extract their wealth and penalize their existence. To understand the origin of this pipeline, we have to look at who actually holds the deeds to American properties. Institutional investors, private equity firms, and massive hedge funds. The entities trading inside the New York Stock Exchange have largely replaced the traditional local landlord. Over the last several years, These financial leviathans recognized that single-family homes were highly reliable, yield-generating assets. Armed with billions of dollars in cash, they arrived in working-class neighborhoods and easily outbid individual families. This aerial view shows a newly constructed residential development. Institutional buyers now acquire homes directly from current owner-occupants and purchase entire neighborhoods like this one before a single house hits the open market. The scale of this consolidation is massive. This map tracks federal accountability data in markets like Jacksonville, Florida, where institutional investors now control up to 22% of all single-family rental homes. In this market, a residential home has been stripped of its role as a foundation for community stability. It functions strictly as a line item on a quarterly portfolio report. Shareholder yield expectations now mandate extreme rent hikes, allowing remote boardrooms to dictate the cost of living for millions of captive renters. Enforcing these yield expectations requires an invisible middleman, centralized algorithmic pricing software. By late 2024, nearly half of all property management organizations had adopted these digital tools. This side-by-side model illustrates how the system overrides normal competition. On the left, a traditional landlord lowers rent to attract a tenant. On the right, the AI model pools private leasing data from thousands of supposedly competing property owners into a single central server. Using that aggregated data, the central server calculates and pushes daily hyperinflated rent prices across the entire city simultaneously, functioning as a digitized price-fixing cartel. Notice what happens to the units on the right. The algorithm intentionally tolerates higher vacancy rates. Houses set empty, yet the centralized revenue counter continues to climb. The logic is entirely mathematical. The artificially inflated rents extracted from the remaining tenants more than compensate for the lost income of the empty units. The second function of this software is a highly aggressive AI-led tenant screening protocol that acts as an impenetrable digital wall. These automated systems filter out applicants with ruthless efficiency. Anyone with a slight credit anomaly, a past medical debt, or a previous landlord dispute is instantly rejected without any opportunity for human review. Delegating basic shelter to a centralized algorithm completely decouples pricing from local wages. It removes negotiation and empathy from the equation, ensuring the absolute mathematical limit of what a market can bear becomes the new baseline price of survival. As algorithmic displacement flooded cities with newly unhoused citizens, local and federal governments faced a choice. They could regulate the corporate monopolies causing the crisis, or they could hide the visible victims. They chose the latter. This pediment belongs to the United States Supreme Court, which in June 2024 handed down a devastating ruling in the case of City of Grants Pass versus Johnson. For decades, courts generally interpreted the Eighth Amendment to mean you could not punish someone for their sheer status of existence. If a city lacked available shelter beds, arresting someone for sleeping outdoors with a blanket was considered cruel and unusual punishment. The Grants Pass ruling eliminated that constitutional protection. The court decided that municipalities have the full legal authority to arrest, fine, and jail individuals for camping on public property, regardless of whether alternative shelter actually exists. The legislative response was swift and brutal. Over the next 2 years, 14 states and more than 350 cities aggressively passed laws criminalizing homelessness. Florida implemented sweeping statewide bans, resulting in mass arrests for simply sleeping in public spaces. In Louisiana, new legislation opened the door for local governments to force unhoused individuals into treatment facilities and subject them to unpaid labor. The Grants Pass decision provided a clear, immediate signal to local governments across the country. The Constitution would no longer stand in the way of using police and heavy machinery to violently manage the economic fallout of the housing crisis. When algorithmic evictions intersect with the criminalization of survival, they engineer an inescapable trap. We can trace a displaced worker through this exact cycle. In step 1, a corporate landlord raises the rent by an algorithmically dictated 20%, resulting in eviction. And a police officer issues the sleeping worker a $500 citation for illegal camping. Because they couldn't afford rent, they cannot afford the punitive fine, and massive late fees accrue. By step 4, that unpaid fine triggers an arrest warrant. A minor traffic stop or a secondary police encounter results in the individual being handcuffed, processed, and incarcerated. Inside these county jail cells, the economic failure of losing a home officially becomes a permanent criminal record. Upon release, their situation is significantly worse. They now possess an eviction on their credit history and a criminal conviction on their background check. No automated property management software will approve their rental application, and no conventional employer will hire them. This system legally converts civil economic failure into a permanent criminal record, ensuring a person can never climb out of poverty and funneling them directly into the profitable prison industrial complex. Politicians frequently sell these anti-camping ordinances as necessary measures to restore public order, but examining the fiscal math reveals an objective failure for the American taxpayer. This ledger tracks the municipal budget drain. The rapidly climbing red bar represents the massive costs of paying police overtime for encampment raids, funding specialized sanitation and hazardous waste crews, and absorbing astronomical daily booking fees at the county jail. Compare that to the green bar, which represents the cost of providing a subsidized apartment or permanent supportive housing. The punitive strategy completely dwarfs the cost of the structural solution. The empirical data is undeniable. It costs the public exponentially more money to cycle an unhoused person through armed police encounters and jail cells than it does to simply provide them with a home. Taxpayers are bleeding their local budgets dry to fund the illusion of a solution. They're paying billions of dollars to violently manage the symptoms of a disease that Wall Street deliberately engineered. The 2026 eviction endgame is a manufactured crisis. It is the result of specific policy choices and unchecked corporate consolidation. Because this pipeline was mathematically engineered, it can be structurally unmade. This blueprint outlines 4 actions to dismantle the trap. First, federal legislators must enact strict corporate caps, permanently restricting institutional investors from acquiring single-family homes. Second, algorithmic price-fixing software must be classified as an antitrust violation and banned outright. Third, Congress must pass the Housing Not Handcuffs Act to prevent municipalities from criminalizing basic survival on public land. Finally, local governments must immediately redirect funds wasted on police sweeps and incarceration into non-market social housing, ensuring permanent affordability. Nationwide, the consequences of inaction are playing out on the streets as demonstrators gather outside the Supreme Court protesting the erosion of basic survival protections. The data is clear, leaving society with a definitive choice. We either establish housing as an irrevocable human right, decoupled from speculative finance, or we accept our reality as a nation that arrests its own citizens for the crime of being too poor to survive.